Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. If this is your first time here, my name is Jody, I love watches, and I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel by hitting the big button that says subscribe on it. It's hard for me to believe now, but when I started this channel back in 2016, I had never owned a Seiko watch. I say hard to believe because since then I have bought at least 50 and reviewed at least another 25 on loan. Now I have not kept them all. I quite often buy a Seiko, then sell a Seiko to buy another Seiko, but I have kept a few of them and should probably have kept a few more of them. Given all of this hands-on experience, I thought I was in a reasonable position to make a top 10 video of my favourite Seiko watches under $1,000 US. If you're keen to pick up one of these for yourself, I'll leave links to all 10 in the description of the video to help start you off. Have I missed your favourite? Do you know of a hidden gem that I have somehow managed to overlook? Leave me a comment, let me know. I'm sure I haven't bought my last Seiko, put it that way. Alright, let's get on with the top 10. It's interesting to see this list holistically. There are a few new Seikos released over the last 5 years, and a few older models, some of which have now been discontinued. But to really confuse us all from the beginning, I'm going to start with a new old Seiko, the King Turtle. The Turtle has been a Seiko mainstay for a decade now, but a couple of years ago they gave it a bit of a refresh, adding some of the parts that up until then people used to have to add themselves, like sapphire crystal and a ceramic bezel insert, hence the King prefix. If you want a modern Seiko diver for under $500 US with those features but don't want to add them yourself, the King Turtle and the King Samurai are 100% the way to go. It's a classic case shape as well. It's not a small watch, but it wears better than you would expect because Seikos usually have very compact lug-to-lug dimensions, and this one is no different. I like the grenade pattern on the dial, and I must admit I don't even mind the candy bar cyclops, despite the fact that it's a bit controversial. You can buy one of these on eBay currently for around $350 US upwards depending on the version. A great watch to start off today's list. Next up at number 2, it is one of Seiko's old models that is now discontinued, but you can still buy it. I bought my second a couple of years ago. It's actually the first Seiko that I bought back in 2017. It's the SN ZG013. This is Seiko's interpretation of a classic affordable field watch. It has a large dial, it's very legible, very easy to read, and it's a good size for a field watch as well at 42mm. It has pretty good lume on the hands and the indices, and I think it's really rather attractive. Now, like all of these old school Seiko 5s, it's powered by the 7S movement. A bit of a dinosaur to be honest, no hacking, no hand winding, so you're doing the Seiko shuffle to get this one moving. But if you're going to wear it as a daily, it's not really going to be an issue. The bracelet on it though is not the finest, a bit of a recurring theme for many of their entry-level pieces, but the watch is available in different colours on a canvas strap, or just put it on your favourite 22mm lug width strap anyway. They released a new version of this one last year, but I don't think it's as good as the original, which is why the original is the watch that makes my top 10. You can still grab one of these for under $175 on eBay. Pretty good value for a discontinued Seiko. At number 3, I simply could not make this list without acknowledging the Cocktail Time series. Starting back in 2010 with the original JDM Sarb033, it's now a hugely popular series of dressy watches under the Presage banner with dials inspired by cocktails. I have bought and borrowed a number of them, but it was my most recent purchase of this, the Irish Coffee 3-hander, that led me to my personal perfect cocktail time. Nobody does affordable dials like Seiko. I paid around $250 US equivalent for this one during a sale, but they are readily available for around $100 more than that on eBay. This does not look like a sub $500 US watch, not to me anyway. They're not always as subtle as this one though. Some of the dials are a bit in your face, and I'm not a fan of the ones with power meters or other complications. I prefer my dressier watches a little bit cleaner than that. But as I said, there are dozens of these models now available, so you are bound to find one that you like the look of. Be warned though, Hardlex crystal is not very hard. It's a mineral crystal that in my experience scratches pretty easily, so take extra care not to spill your cocktail. Alright, this next watch is one that really had to be here. I think I would have got lynched had I not included the SKX on the list. The second of 3 discontinued models on the list, Seiko pulled the pin on this one after a 20-year production run, so finding a used example should not be all that hard. 2 sizes were offered, 38 and 42, and there were a couple of different color versions of the larger watch. These were well under $200 before they were discontinued, and that got you a big brand automatic dive watch with a super comfortable Jubilee bracelet that was actually ISO rated to 200 meters. Now, K models were assembled in Malaysia, J models assembled in Japan, although I've never been convinced that there was much of a difference. Again, the 7S movement, this time the 26, fairly basic, so many people modded these themselves and they switched out that movement for the newer 4R. In fact, there was and still is an enormous mod scene around the SKX. It is the Honda Civic of dive watches, if you will. Don't pay silly money for one of these today. I'm not sure I'd be paying $580. I'd be more inclined to buy a pre-modified one for around half of that. Either way, it's a watch that is full of charm and will forever be remembered fondly by collectors. The watch following the SKX on this list is carefully chosen because it was rumoured to have been released as its intended replacement. And no, it's not the 5KX, it's the Mini Turtle. Now, the Mini Turtle is a funny one because it has, to all intents and purposes, been forgotten. I'm not quite sure what the problem was with it. It had a clean and simple look like most Seiko divers, and it wears fantastically well. 42mm diameter, 43mm lug to lug. Wears a bit stiff though because of a lack of articulation in the bracelet, but for whatever reason it just didn't seem to inspire collectors as much as Seiko's other releases. Now, like every other watch on the list today, I bought it, but I admit I sold my Mini Turtle and I regret selling my Mini Turtle, so I might just have to do something about that. Now, they may be scarce these days, but you can still buy them. I'd suggest picking one up direct from Japan, one of the JDM only releases with the red second hand and red touches, around $380 either on eBay or from a Japanese vendor. Yeah, I definitely felt I got rid of mine too quickly. It's a watch that deserves more credit than I think it received. Moving on to a watch that received plenty of credit, plaudits and love, it's the Sarb033. Now, this was a JDM only release, but it was readily available outside of Japan. Discontinued a number of years ago as well, sadly. Before then, you could pick one of these up for under $300. And if you did, well done you, because it's a bit of a classic. I paid more than that for mine after they were discontinued, but I have no regrets whatsoever. I've worn it a lot and I will never sell it. In some ways, the Sarb033 represents the best of old Seiko, when you could get sapphire crystal and a 6R movement for the same price that today only gets you mineral crystal and a 4R movement. Poor man's date just to some, thinking man's date just to others. I swapped mine out years ago for a Jubilee and I have not looked back since. I'm also considering adding domed sapphire, but I'm in no rush to do that. There was and still is an 035 model available with a cream dial rather than the brown black of the 033. Both models still pop up for sale regularly. And even at the inflated prices being asked today, I think there's still value to be had in the Sarb. They are just that good. Just don't fall prey to some of the optimistic pricing on eBay and elsewhere. You can buy a grand Seiko for that money, for goodness sakes. There are plenty of good used examples at slightly more sensible prices around the $500 mark. That's actually still reasonable value, I think, because since it was discontinued, Seiko haven't really released anything since then to compete with it. Now, I think that's a shame. The popularity of this model shows there was a big market outside of Japan for an affordable sub 40mm three-hand sports watch that can genuinely go anywhere and do anything. Okay. This one is hard for me. It's on today's list because I think it's a fantastic watch, but my experience with mine, the one I bought, highlights Seiko's dark side. It's a watch that I fell in love with and bought, then fell rapidly out of love with and sold at a considerable loss, all without it ever having left the house. It's the Steelmaster, the SPB185. Now, I borrowed one for review and I loved it. It was just such a good fit for my wrist, and I loved the stainless steel bezel and tiny red accent on the second hand, just giving the whole watch a bit of a lift. I loved it so much that I bought one for myself and got it shipped direct from Japan by a company that claims that they check every watch for alignment issues before they post them. Perhaps their QC guy was asleep the day he posted mine, because it came with a whopping misalignment of the bezel. Now at $200 I forgive. At $800 I do not forgive. I cannot forgive. I was genuinely gutted with that one. Because, well, A, I love the watch so much, and B, I had paid so much money for it. I never wore it and I sold it several months later. It's on today's list though because if you get a good one, it's an awesome watch. You don't have to get the steel bezel version. There are plenty of other models that use this case and bracelet but with different dial and bezel combinations. But do be warned when you buy a Seiko online that their quality control is pretty poor compared to the likes of Citizen or Orient. I think, to be honest, it's a 50-50 as to whether or not you get one with a chapter ring and bezel that actually line up or not. And this is now as far up the Seiko ladder as I go. I do not even entertain any Seikos that cost more than $1,000 because the quality control is just so variable. I made that vow in a video 2 years ago and I have stuck by it resolutely since then. If you want to spend more than $1,000, buy an Oris, buy a Christopher Ward, don't buy a Seiko. While I dry my tears, let's talk about a watch that I'm still in the honeymoon phase with. In fact, I'm wearing it now. It's the SNJ025, aka the Arnie. So called because it's a re-release of the Annie Digi Seiko that Mr. Schwarzenegger wore in many of his movies that I watched back in the 1980s. Now I reviewed the Arnie, or two of them, a couple of years ago, but then I rather forgot about it until I came across one at a bargain price in my shopping mall challenge video that I made last month. And I really like it. It's big, it's chunky, but it's eminently wearable because once again, it has a short lug to lug. The Arnie also represents Seiko's solar quartz on today's list. I'm increasingly moving back towards quartz when I'm buying pieces for me because of the convenience, and it doesn't get more convenient than a watch you never have to set and never have to change the battery on, does it? Plus, being an Annie Digi, you get so much more than you do with a three-hander, including alarm, stopwatch and light, all stuff that is genuinely useful to have on your wrist. You know, it's still a big guy, and having such a muscle-bound patron, it makes me feel a bit scrawny, like I need to hit the gym before I can even wear it, but I can definitely see myself keeping this one long term just because of the extra utility and because it's a little bit different to everything else I've got in my collection. I got mine for a little over $300. You should be able to get close to that on eBay. They just released a new model with the display at the bottom rather than the top. I think there has been a negative impact on the prices of the old one, which is a positive, if you ask me. So we are almost at the end of the list, but I still have a couple of crackers up my sleeve, starting with a watch that I heralded as the best new Seiko in years when I reviewed it at launch. It's the so-called DressKX range, and I stand by that statement 100%. These are a great size with classic 40-20 proportions. The case is just buttery smooth to the touch, meaning the watch is super comfortable to wear as a daily. It has the 4R hacking and hand winding movement, a good level of water resistance, and some high quality Lumi Bright Lume on the dial and the handset. The bracelets they come on are okay, but they're also available on NATO straps for less money if you just want the watch head and are going to put it on something you already have in the house anyway. If you find sub 40mm gathers like the Sarb a bit too small for your wrists, this is the one to go for. It's such a versatile all-rounder. And of course, being a Seiko, if you are keen to mod it, you can tinker away to your heart's content, as I did by adding sapphire and a colour match crown to mine. On a good day, you can find one of these for around $170 on a bracelet, less than that on a NATO. Now that is obviously a lot more than the old school 37mm Seiko 5s, but these are just so much better, I think it is well worth paying the extra. And finally, it is another old school Seiko that has been discontinued. I bought two of these, although I must admit that I sold both of them. It's the SNZH57, aka the Seiko 55 Fathoms, because it bears a passing resemblance to a Blancpain. If you bought one of these 5 years ago, congratulations, it's probably now worth twice what you paid for it. I know everything is more expensive than it was 5 years ago, but it's still a bit unusual to find an entry-level Seiko that has risen in value like this one has. I think that's perhaps because it never looked like an entry-level watch in the first place. The dial, the hands, the shiny mineral crystal bezel insert, the dome crystal itself, all made it look more expensive than it actually was, if perhaps not quite as expensive as a Blancpain. Being an older model, the 7S appears once more, as do hollow end links and a fairly cheap clasp. But this one is just screaming out for either a rubber strap or some distressed leather to really accentuate that lovely black and gold colour scheme. Not sure there's much value in it at $360 today, but it still looks bloody good. So there you have it. I actually found that a very interesting exercise, having bought and handled so many Seikos. Forcing myself to create a list of only 10 ended up being quite revealing. A couple of classics like the SKX and the Sarb, but actually quite a few new models as well, including the DressKX and that gorgeous Irish coffee Presage, both still available for reasonable prices. I think that shows that perhaps the days of ultimate value from Seiko are behind us, but you can still get a great watch for not a lot of money if you choose your model carefully. That's my top 10, but what about you? Leave me a comment, let me know your favourites. I could probably have made it a top 20, perhaps I'll make another top 10 list in the future, especially if I continue to buy Seikos at a similar rate I have done in the past. Okay, if you've made it this far, you are clearly a big fan of the brand. Why not watch some more Seiko content here or here? Thanks for watching this one. I'll see you again in a future video, I hope.